This is a story about Georgia. We will introduce you to its art and traditions, to its past. We will describe the dark Bolshevik period, which is the direct cause of recent turmoil. For nearly 2 centuries, this ancient nation has been isolated from Europe. As one of the Tsar's spoils, Georgia was annexed by the Russian Empire in the early 19th century. After a brief period of independence following the October 1917 revolution, Georgia was again invaded by the Red Army. And today, after the breakdown of the Soviet Union, the country has been dragged into an unequal war against the Russian military machine, now piloted by nostalgic sympathizers of the ancient empire. We will be using archival footage and film excerpts from 5 generations of Georgian filmmakers, who bear witness to the history and culture of this country. A country we love, a country we are proud of, and sometimes a country we are ashamed of.
Georgia has lived at war since 1991. Here we see its beginnings. Tbilisi, the capital, in the aftermath of violence following the overthrow of the government. The images you see are the result of a brief but extremely violent civil war. Unfortunately, such pictures from countries near Russia have become sadly familiar. They reflect the policies of a superpower determined to preserve its influence and territorial acquisitions. Georgia, population 5 million. The last bastion of Christendom on the eastern edges of Europe. It is separated from Russia by the Caucasus mountain range. Let's take a step back in time. A quarter of the Georgian population lives in Tbilisi amid a wide variety of ethnic groups: Kurds, Armenians, Russians, Jews, and others. The government once took pride in boasting that its percentage of postgraduate students was the highest of all republics in the Soviet Union. It seems that Georgian parents were concerned with protecting their children from a corrupt system tainted with parasitic tendencies. The city had a reputation for being a hospitable place, both nonchalant and lively. Life ran its course, out in the open, on balconies joining the different households of residential buildings around an interior courtyard. To make the city more appealing to tourists, and perhaps to destroy a way of life which could not be controlled by the state, the new architects destroyed the courtyards and exposed the balconies to indiscreet eyes of the street. City residents nicknamed the leading architect of this trend Balkonsky. And so the true function of the balcony was stripped for the benefit of tourists, and its true life was lost. As early as the 1st century AD, apostles Peter and Andrew preached in Georgia. Saint Nino of Cappadocia followed after them. In 337, Georgia adopted Christianity as its state religion. The Georgian Church is orthodox, autocephalous, and independent. Despite dubious training under the auspices of the Soviet state, Ilya II, saintly and serene patriarch of all of Georgia, won the respect of the population for his devotion to the revival of the Georgian Church. This Soviet-built automobile, an exact replica of the Fiat Topolino, is the Poor People's Corps. As with many other Soviet copies, it was first hailed as an original invention of Russian engineers. The country's poor have not lost their love for getting together, singing and drinking. To be poor in Soviet Georgia meant being uncorrupted, having clean hands. Wine growing has always played an important part in the daily life of Georgians. Ever since the dawn of ages, a complex and elaborate ritual has accompanied the drink. At the beginning of this century, Georgians cultivated no less than 500 varieties of grapes. Today, only 200 are grown. Standardization was a death blow to many local appellations. An inflationary period of foodstuff quotas followed, as if one could compare vineyards and potato fields. Soon, sugar and water were added to the grape juice. The beverage caused headaches, but people drank it all the same. Who knows when the art of making fine wine will return? Singing helps dry up the liquor, but polyphonic song is no easy matter. Too bad for you if you can't carry a tune, you have to keep quiet. Writing is the reflection of thought. A thought which is not written can be easily deformed. In order for thought to serve future generations, it needs a medium, which is that of the written text. The 33 letters in the Georgian alphabet each correspond to a precise sound used in today's spoken language. This stone tablet, dating from the 5th century, is proof of the precocious maturity of a language which has displayed astonishing stability despite numerous invasions. For today's Georgians, everyday language is directly linked to the word of their ancestors. Today, the Georgian alphabet is one of the 14 existing alphabets in the world. There are two types of writing, the sacred and the secular. Here is an example of ecclesiastical script. a manuscript from the 9th century which serves throughout the world as one of the references for translations of the New Testament. And here we see an example of layman's writing, or equestrian script. Children are taught to write their mother tongue in gentle, well-rounded forms. Here we see a children's book of ABCs. Over 26 centuries, Georgia has driven back Greeks, Romans, Persians, Arabs, Turks, and Mongols. After the fall of Byzantium, Georgia was increasingly surrounded by strong Muslim empires. The ruins of fortresses and watchtowers can be seen everywhere. Stories of battles continue to be told. This valley looks like it is covered with grass, but in fact it is a thicket intentionally cut low to the ground so that the Persian horses would break their legs in it. The dark cloud of our arrows then descended upon their heads. Each village bears the memory of these battles as if they had taken place only yesterday. The watchtowers used open fires to warn the population of enemy approach, but this has not stopped the Georgian population from being decimated over the centuries. The northern frontier is defended by a natural impenetrable fortress, the Greater Caucasus, a mountain range with altitudes of 4,000 to 6,000 meters. The population traditionally seeks refuge here from invaders. Most recently, Georgians fled the threat of ethnic cleansing in Abkhazia and settled in Stanitia. For centuries, these mountains have been cut off from the rest of the world. Ancestral customs and traditions have endured here basically undisturbed. The region boasts of an ancient school of polyphonic singing, not to mention Georgia's oldest extant churches and frescoes. It is a land of warriors who live by strict codes of honor. Orthodox rites blend harmoniously with pagan cults that have flourished here over the ages. Road construction has made the region accessible to the flow of tourists from all over Russia. Tourist resorts have become a place for fascinating discovery. Loose women, liquor, drugs, in short, civilization. Strict morals soon proved inadequate against such temptations. Old people had little else to do but grumble and pray. The first icons of St. George represent him vanquishing Emperor Diocletian, who made a martyr of him. Later, this merged with the traditional imagery of St. George slaying the dragon. After the Virgin Mary, the land's guardian saint, St. George is the most respected saint in Georgia. The holiday in his name is particularly important. The cult of George, the White, had arisen from pagan beliefs. He watched over the land and those who labored it. He was associated with the moon, which was the object of yet another cult. St. George's cause was identified with the warriors who fought strong, ruthless invaders, who naturally represented the dragon. Sometimes, as here, images of warriors decorated Svan church exteriors. And inside, angels themselves were often armed, for they were warriors of the just cause.
Sifianguluzi dadi da buach pedama chagara fast. Atskelian maldiandi da bach kataring da. Atina banis gudi eruatsila jiza simona hansmunde.
Шоб Христеш, Сиджекуда, Дебочкеда Христеш, Слахмашниш Христеш, Искулим Зирдида Буджу, Саямахата, Хендиан Пишир Христборч, Лайне, Дебочкеда Шоб Христеш, Нейнишкина, Лирсна Вечариш,
خصوصا مادر اقصد مردی مادر شده خود مادر سوجم زر مادر اقصد مردی مادری خصوصا خصوصا مردن شده خود مادر در واقع ما در واقع در کوچنگست در واقع در کوچنگی مادر سیجار بسیجار خلاص چیکار خصوصا خواندن در کوچنگی مادر خواهید شده خود مادری شنی خوشبو آویز در خود مادر محمدی جل مادری چیکار سونالو زخم و خلم و خلم صدم بستم و خلم جمالیا
ატვერის თავში ბრძანებელო გიორგი მოსამართლეო შვანთის შობელო მიროწმინდა ქართველთა განმარტლებელო კაბადოკიელო დიდო კალკიანო დიდო საძირკულიანო დიდო სამართლიანო
This school of fresco painting differentiates itself from its Byzantine origins through a freedom of expression and an interest for the inner world of man. As early as the 11th century, it anticipates the Quattrocento. In the high mountains of Svanicha, villages were never surrounded by common ramparts. Each man maintained his own tower or fortress. Disputes were handled in a direct person-to-person manner, each individual being held responsible for his own actions. Lacking community sanctions, everybody was expected to behave with the utmost propriety. The country is covered with churches and monasteries, many of which are hewn in rock. In times of peace, construction increased and widely diverse styles flourished. Here we see the David Gareggi Monastery Church, named after one of the 12 Syrian monks who came to build several monasteries in the 6th century. These sites became centers of learning and enlightenment, and gave rise to schools of philosophy nourished by the thought of Plato and Aristotle. Church architecture is far from canonical. Many churches were built on sites where ancient pagan rites were performed in an attempt to replace and supplant their customs. They are visible from afar, blending harmoniously into the countryside. They were often enclosed by ramparts and had difficult access routes. With the growing strength of the church, vast cathedrals were built. It was a period of great competition between painters, masons, and architects who were determined to make each sanctuary different from all others, perhaps in an effort to emphasize the dualistic concepts of the Georgian church. This cathedral was erected on the site where the Georgian church conserved the most important relic of early Christianity, Christ's tunic. The vine has always been a symbol of Christian faith. The first thing invaders did was to raze the vineyards. Each family raises its banner into the sky to mark its presence. According to legend, the eagle came to gnaw at the liver of Prometheus in these mountains. He had been chained here for having offered the gift of fire to mortal man. He is said to have taught man the knowledge basic to any civilization, the art of working metals, of healing the sick, of writing. Archaeological digs show that metalworking in Georgia dates back to the 4th millennium BC. Later, the art of precious metal embossing and chasing became a highly popular and widespread practice which continues to this day, as does jewelry making, but now only copper is used. Archaeological data has allowed us to reconstruct the trail of the development of metalworking throughout the Celtic civilization. This combat chariot is a several thousand-year-old toy. The earth in these parts is forever revealing fragments of history. Excavations are a hobby enjoyed by all ages, an agreeable, relaxing pastime and an opportunity to share in good company. The earthenware amphora is the point of departure for an original method of making wine. The container is buried to the neck and thoroughly cleaned. The largest of these amphoras can hold several hundred liters. Sealed tightly, the wine breathes through the amphora and ferments with the must. Pressing the grapes is still done in the old way. By not crushing the seeds, the wine does not become bitter. We only drink mark at the beginning of meals to whet the appetite. When an amphora is unsealed to draw out the desired quantity of wine, the remaining wine is poured into a smaller amphora, filling it to the brim. This process is repeated down to the smallest amphora, which has a capacity of about 100 liters, right up to the next harvest period. Of course, metal utensils are never brought into contact with the wine. The function of wine is spiritual, not gastronomic. A toast is made by the head of the table, then everybody is expected to add a contribution. Guests evoke their ancestors, relatives, children's futures, past deeds, and so on, and all are encouraged to follow the righteous path. Not holding down one's wine or criticizing others are sure signs of bad manners. Well, that's the way it used to be. Times have changed somewhat, but we're telling you about how things were back then. We'll return to the present day in a little while. Georgia is the site of other Greek legends. Take Jason, for example, who crossed the tempestuous Black Sea peopled by sirens and other dangerous creatures. Jason reached western Georgia, then called Colchis, to steal the golden fleece and bring back crazed Medea, who was to cause him so much trouble. One can think of the golden fleece as an embodiment of the art of winemaking, metalworking, or perhaps the cultivating of land, but that's Greek legend and does not actually concern us here. King David the Builder reigned 40 years in unified Georgia at the end of the 11th century by fighting off foreign enemies and his own feudal lords who were tearing apart the country. He stamped the following phrase on his coins: "I am the Messiah's sword." He liberated Tbilisi from the Arabs and repelled the Turks, inaugurating the land's first golden age. His grandson George III and his great-granddaughter Queen Tamar followed after him. At the dawn of the 13th century, Queen Tamar's empire spread from the Black Sea to the Caspian Sea. Georgia had become a multinational state on an equal footing with Western Europe, Rome, and the Near East. This military fortress city, Vardzia, stood before the Turk and Arab world. In terms of housing technology, it was advanced for its time. Water arrived via an aqueduct, and a system of canals irrigated the entire city, making daily life possible for 20,000 people. It's a labyrinth of rooms and cells joined together by corridors. Again, we find the buried wine amphoras. As early as the 11th century, Georgia was intent on becoming the leading figure of Christendom. It established monasteries on Mount Sinai and Mount Athos, as well as in Bulgaria, Cyprus, and Crete. A zone of mutual influence arose between Georgia and Europe. Contacts with Eastern scholars grew in number. Translations of Greek, Persian, Arab, and Byzantine texts made Georgia a doorway to the West for ideas and art from the East. This long period of peace allowed the art of masons and architects to reach maturity. They could travel and were welcomed the world over. They have left us the imprint of their mastery. Gelati was the seat of the influential Academy of Sciences, where ideas were born which would later lead to the Renaissance. In the hearts of Georgians, this era is a dream period, a golden age lost forever. The canonized Queen Tamar left behind an image of wisdom, beauty, and justice. Admired by all during her lifetime, she was a patron of the arts. Rastaveli's poem, "The Knight in the Tiger's Skin," is a testimony to the rich thought of this period. All households own a copy of this book, from the poorest peasants to the richest feudal lords. Many knew the poem's lines by heart and would quote them on special occasions. Children were once told, "All that you give is yours, all that you take is lost." Unfortunately, this proverb has lost all meaning, but in the heart of each and every Georgian you can find a longing for this blessed country which did, it seems, actually exist. But where is it now? Nobody knows, and so we await its return. Queen Tamar died in 1213. Out of fear that her tomb would be defiled by Muslims, 3 coffins left the palace to go off in 3 separate directions. To this day, nobody knows where she's buried. Certain clues lead us to believe that her tomb resides in the Monastery of the Cross in Jerusalem. Nor does anyone know where the tomb of Rustaveli is located, or even what his real name was. We only know that he was probably born in Rustavi. That's the way we are. We respect them, we quote them, and that's it. After the death of the queen, the throne went to her son, George-1. Soon Persians attacked the country and were shortly after followed by hordes of Mongols. This marked the beginning of the darkest period of Georgian history. The fall of Constantinople would leave Georgia alone before the great Asiatic powers.
Აცხოვნე უფალო ერი შენი, დააკურთხე სამკვიდრებელი შენი. ძლევა იჯვარითა ბარბაროსთა ზედა, ღვთივ დაცულსა ერსა ჩვენსა.
As we know, Georgia is a passageway between Asia and Europe, a strategic crossroads on the Silk Route. It is a naturally rich country by the sea with a subtropical climate and fertile land. This can explain its happiness and its unhappiness, for its land has always been coveted by others. The Mongol yoke lasted more than 100 years. The country was then divided into several territories. Tbilisi was pillaged and destroyed 8 times by Tamerlane alone, who came after the Mongols, and here is what remains of this mighty kingdom. Georgians never laid down their arms, but the country was drained of its blood. Feudal rivalry and treason facilitated the enemy's task. Ruthless foreign invaders destroyed all forms of culture, religion, and all productive or military potential. The country was attacked from the southwest by the Turks, who allied themselves with northern Caucasus tribes to settle in Abkhazia. The 16th century reign of Shahbaz consolidated Persia's power. Persian forces plundered Kakheti and deported 200,000 of its residents, repopulating it with Muslims. Tbilisi, or Tiflis, is the vital center of the Transcaucasus, a city rich in palaces and in commerce. No wonder it was coveted to the point of being ransacked 27 times. Georgian women were renowned for their beauty, grace, and education. With much consideration, they were forced to marry Georgia's powerful conquerors. During this period, the country's population dwindled to a mere 800,000 inhabitants. Georgian kings were often obliged to wear a turban and convert to Islam, but this did not stop them from being true Christians or from practicing their faith in hiding. The great warrior King Irakli II was finally forced to deal with Russia, his only Christian neighbor. the terms of the treaty between King Irakli and Catherine the Great, Georgia remained independent in exchange for defending Russia's southern borders. In return, Russia guaranteed its protection with military aid. But the Russians failed to keep their promise. The Russian army entered Georgia, never to leave again. George XII was our last king. Georgia was annexed after his death. His descendants had to engage in other disciplines, such as the sciences. In 1801, Alexander I reinforced the annexation of Georgia's kingdom. Under the command of General Noring, it was transformed into a Russian province. And so the Bagratian dynasty, Europe's oldest, disappeared. On their coat of arms, one can distinguish a lyre and a palm leaf, symbols of their relation to the Hebrew King David, and through him to Christ, whose tunic figures prominently. The Georgian Church also had its autonomy suppressed. Its patriarch, Anton, was replaced by an exarch, ambassador of the Russian Synod. The standard architecture of colonial Russian churches was ordained for every city. These are the same structures and onion-shaped cupolas that can be found in Poland and Bulgaria, in the Baltic states, in Central Asia, even in Paris and Berlin. All are copies of a single model. This cathedral in central Tbilisi, for example, is identical to the one in Sofia. To its faraway provinces, the Russian Synod liked sending its delinquent priests, a dubious, debauched, unseemly clergy. In spite of being 7 centuries older than the Russian Church, the Georgian Church's spiritual leaders were barred from practice and sometimes even eliminated. The Destinies of the Georgian Church, Russian Banner Publishers, Moscow, 1907, testimony gathered by Nikolai Durnovo. Let us read.
Up to 1811, the Georgian Church was composed of 26 dioceses. In 1818, only 5 remained. From 1811 on, 15 monasteries and 800 churches were shut down. This is what the Russian clerical bureaucracy in Georgia brought about. The looting of monasteries and holy places earned the Russian Synod tens of millions of rubles. Russian exarchs did not come as shepherds of their designated parishes. They came to plunder and dilapidate the goods of the Georgian Church. Even the renowned frescoes of the Mtsketa Cathedral were whitewashed on the orders of Metropolitan Exarch Isidore. This same Isidore allowed Pope Yevsevy Iblinski to pillage the reliquary of the Patriarchs of Georgia and to lift precious stones from the chasubles, mitres, and icons. The ancient frescoes of churches in the Kartli region were also covered over. Up to 1870, invaluable treasures were conserved in the reliquary of the Galati Monastery, including a gospel book from the 11th century which was bound in gold and set with ancient enamel plaques. With the Exarch's permission, Count Levashov, governor of Kutaisi, snatched the binding and sold it to England. Another governor, Bobrinsky, cut out illuminated manuscripts. Precious texts and miniatures disappeared in this manner. The 4 rubies bequeathed by Queen Tamar for the miraculous icon of the Holy Virgin of Karkuli, painted by the evangelist Luke, were stolen from its frame and crown.
That's him, the Metropolitan Isidore, the great thief. Russian popes did not come to preach nor to educate a population more cultivated than they. In truth, they came to pillage under military protection. At the same time, Georgia inherited a population of honest people like these, old believers who had been chased out of Imperial Russia. Photos of insurgents. Insurrections occurred from 1804 in Kakheti and then in Emireti. The people rebelled against bureaucrats they despised when they discovered that justice could be bought with favors. Russian life, as summed up by Gogol, had been forced upon a country not ready to receive this gift. The Georgian nobility, whose primary skill had always been war, was immediately appreciated by Russian army professionals. Without their help, Russians would have found it nearly impossible to subdue the mountain folk in northern Caucasus. What's more, Georgians had a few scores to settle with Muslim tribes who had been ransacking their country for centuries. A strange creature was raising its head in the villages of northern Caucasus, the Russian. Here we see a prisoner of war. Who has sent him here? What do they want? Our misfortunes had only begun. Over time, all ancestral codes are upset by the Russian occupation. Peoples of different beliefs and languages who had taken thousands of years to live in peace were deported, punished and massacred, all toward the purpose of raising one against the other. Finally, they had to confront the following dilemma: become Russian, lose one's identity, or die. The Cossacks were mercenaries of diverse origins who enforced Russian rule throughout the empire. They carried out the dirty work. They were extremely brutal watchdogs of Tsarism. Legendary warrior chief of the mountain resistance fighters, Shamil, died in captivity. Slowly driven back by invaders, small Caucasian tribes took refuge in Georgia. The Ossets early on, then the Apsuas and Cherkess tribes, which were integrated by Abkhazia. The Russian plan was to dissolve Georgian identity by mixing it with ethnic groups of different origins. Tiflis finally experienced a flourishing period of peace. Its trade increased, particularly due to the Armenians, for Georgians have no flair for business. Armenians had fled Turkish territory after the first genocide and settled in Abkhazia and the southern part of the country. Tiflis became the crossroads for merchandise and travelers between Asia and Europe. It's said that transactions could be carried out in as many as 30 languages in those days. The city was changing. Boats arrived at the port of Poti from all over Europe, bringing architects and masons to construct the new bourgeois city. The Opera House, the Grand Palace, theaters, the nobility's clubhouse, department stores, hotels. The Russian influence was not all negative. Traditionally a place of exile, Georgia received its share of Russian intellectuals and Polish nobles following the anti-Tsarist insurrections. Inversely, only famous military personnel was sent over to the Russians. Names of many Georgian officers can be read on the walls of honor in the St. George Room of the Kremlin. In the 19th century, Georgia welcomed Pushkin, Griboyedov, Lermontov, and later Leon Tolstoy. In the 1830s, young Georgian intellectuals undertook the long voyage to St. Petersburg to gain diplomas from the Academy of Fine Arts, the Medical and Technical University, and other seats of learning. The new generation, born in the 30s, they had been to St. Petersburg and were inspired by European revolutionary ideas. They had assimilated French, Russian, and German languages and literatures. They were dedicated to the idea of a national renaissance. They wanted to form an elite group of thinkers and scholars without openly opposing Tsarism, in order to peacefully obtain Georgian autonomy. Ilya Chavchavadze defined the aims of culture: language, land, and faith. Rajab Shavela, the greatest Georgian poet of the 19th century. Akaki Tsereteli, poet. The writer Alexander Kazbegi. And the ladies. Ilya Chavchavadze founded a bank, vigorously opposed socialists, helped create associations for literature, theater, and universities. His generation managed to escape the control that the Russian administration exercised over the vital centers of the nation. Nicola Pirosmani demolished the foundations of Georgian academic painting. Basing his art on the tradition of fresco painting, he invented a technique of his own. He was a refined colorist. His fellow painters contemptuously labeled him a primitive, like Le Douanier Rousseau. It's always the same old story. He died in misery. His painting was despised by zealots of socialist realism, but in the 1970s the Louvre held a retrospective exhibition of his work. There they are, Pirosmani's models. A Russian newspaper for Russians. Russification spread everywhere. Education in Russian became compulsory, but the fight between Russian and Georgian newspapers went on. An alternative system of education to the compulsory Russian model was established during this period. Gogibashvili and a team of young teachers set about creating books for children. Here is a reading book. In his childhood, a certain Yosef Jugashvili, who would later be called Stalin, wrote verse typical of the period's tone. Rose button, light breeze, skylark and clouds. He was the son of a washerwoman of easy virtue from the small town of Gori, and many were those who claimed to be his half-brother. Bread in Georgian is called puri, which may come from pure, though this could be mere coincidence. In preheated earthenware ovens, bread is baked using ancient methods. Poor. Not too much. Let's go. Off to work. Let there be peace on earth. In peace we'd all feel fine. To youth, health and happiness. At the beginning of the 20th century, Tbilisi was a city of artisans, blacksmiths, coppersmiths, saddlers, cobblers, tailors, music instrument makers, and merchants, butchers, fishmongers. These craftsmen formed different guilds and often lived in the same neighborhoods, even going so far as to wear uniforms in some brotherhoods. The quinto were the jokers of the lot. In the hierarchy of guilds, the highest ranked were the harachokeli, who sported chocha, heavy black coats. They wore high astrakhan shapkas and ornate silver belts. These brotherhoods coexisted peacefully, but they never mixed. And the musha were the carriers, the lowest ranking guild. In this city, Muslims, Jews, Gregorian Armenians, Catholics and Orthodox Christians crossed paths, mingled and lived in equality. World War I broke out just at a time when Georgia was finally at peace. The style was a bit conventional, but no matter, it was a peaceful period. Everything was regulated, all went well, everybody knew his place. Georgians had understood that for their survival in the empire, their function was above all a military one. The War of 1914 goes on. Military professionals were euphoric. Bravado, life in the camps, distant families, amusements. As these careless youths enjoyed themselves, another force was raising its head. Stalin. A common law criminal kicked out of the seminary, he had finally found a family in the Social Democrats. Nobody knows who dug this passageway toward the clandestine printing shop, or even if it was necessary. Later on, a visit to this sacred place would be compulsory for all school children. It is entirely possible that it was constructed after the fact as decor. In any event, the agitprop was energetic and much appreciated by Lenin. Stalin Joseph Vissarionovich became one of the most infamous dictators in the history of humanity. But we haven't quite reached this point. The nobility was playing around, blind to all current events. Enter the October Revolution. These images were staged and directed by Eisenstein. Shamelessly, the Soviets then used them as documentary footage of the events. Here is a real image of Lenin. This, on the other hand, is an actor. The Bolsheviks have joined in the dance. In Georgia, the region most influenced by the new ideas was Guria. May 26, 1918, the independence of the Georgian Republic was proclaimed. Everything that had transpired in Russia left Georgia free to act in sovereignty. The new state meant to be very tolerant and eliminated the dragon so as not to upset its Muslim population. There's St. George, but where's the dragon? Vanished. The joy was immense and the population enthusiastic. The country's leaders were Mensheviks, socialist reformers elected through universal suffrage. The new flag, created by the Social Democrats, was not yet well known. The head of the government, Noe Zordanya, was a Social Democrat leader from Russia. The party was ideologically very close to the Bolsheviks, but tended to be more moderate. There were 5,000 officers in Georgia. They attempted to form a professional army to protect national interests. But the government opposed them, fearful that such an army would become too powerful. Zordanya created a national guard composed uniquely of members of the Social Democratic Party. The guard was undisciplined and incompetent. Each fighter being armed could make up his own mind whether or not to go into battle. Their chief was Djugeli, a former Bolshevik. The National Guard requisitioned the army's entire stock of ammunition. General Kvinitadze wrote,
National Guard troops formed a chaotic mob that often threatened officers. The government placed no confidence in career officers, neither as citizens nor as professionals. Guard positions were appointed in accordance with degrees of adherence to social democratic ideas. Corruption was the motto of these new military authorities. Leaders were playing the game of disunion.
It was an era of long speeches on balconies and of applause. Here we see a parade to celebrate the recovery of Batumi given back by the Turks. In addition to the Georgians, you will see the English, the French, and the Germans parading by. Sikhs from the English army. The French colonial army. French and English flags struck down, and the Georgian flag will soon appear. The Georgian government sent away these foreign forces, proudly claiming that it did not want to be colonized. Yet the borders remained open. There was no army to speak of, and the Russian threat loomed clearer. So what? Hadn't Lenin signed a pact recognizing Georgia? Weren't the Bolsheviks brothers of the Mensheviks? Their embassy, headed by Sergei Kirov, had a total of 700 employees. A large delegation of European Social Democrats from the Second International arrived on Georgian soil. And again the balconies, the interminable speeches. Again the population was urged to stay on the right path. Portraits of Marx were everywhere. No one doubted for a second that these inflamed words would contribute to the creation of paradise on earth. Not to mention the massive support Europe's entire working class promised toward the first social democratic state en route toward the radiant heights of socialism. The legendary social democratic leader Karl Kautsky himself came to visit this blessed land where the dream of all humanity had finally come true. During the night of February 11th, Georgia was attacked by the enemy. War preparations began. General Kvinitadze reports.
6 days before the fall of Georgia, they asked me to lead the army again. The aggression took place 8 months after the signature of the Pact of Non-Aggression and Recognition of Georgia. The paradox was that White Russia attacked Georgia from the west on the very day that the Bolsheviks attacked from the east. It was clear that the Social Democrats, who had governed Georgia for 3 years, were guilty of incompetence and negligence in preparing for war. The country had no unified army. Fortifications were not to be found around the capital. The main passes in the Greater Caucasus were not cut off, and the frontier with Azerbaijan went unprotected. They wanted to preach ideological unity with Bolshevik Russia, and it was only when it was too late that they thought of a united, strong Georgia.
In haste, they managed to adopt the Constitution, at the time the most democratic constitution in the world. It established women's voting rights, abolished capital punishment, decreed the separation of church and state, rejected the extradition of political refugees, and granted the people's right to referendums. On February 24th, the government ordered the retreat. Cadets and officers defended Tbilisi and protected the evacuation of government members and the national treasury. A few hundred people at most went into exile, ministers and high-ranking civil servants. The intelligentsia remained. These shots were directed by German Gogitidze with the participation of General Simon Esadze. The government took the boat to Constantinople and later settled in exile in France. On February 25th, 1921, the Red Army entered Tbilisi. Telegram: to Lenin and Stalin, Moscow, the Kremlin. The red flag floats over Tbilisi. Long live Soviet Georgia. Sergo Orjonikidze. Hecker, a Tbilisi native, led the march into the city. Following the deposed government's advice, the enemy was greeted at the gates of the capital by poets Tizian Tabidze and Paloyashvili, who reported that the government and the army had left the city. Only the civilian population remains. Don't let the army indulge in pillaging and massacre. The Republic, which for 3 years had been edified and defended by the people of Georgia, fell on the 25th of February, 1921. The victor, Sergo Orjonikidze. The authors, Stalin and Lenin.